Hello, it's Friday the 22nd of February and this is UK Column Live. I'm Mike Robinson and with me is Malcolm Massey. How's the weather, Malcolm?
Well, I did check outside today and the weather looks as frosty as the Cabinet Office and probably as chilled as George Osborne's bedroom.
Okay. So, where are we starting?
Today I think we'll start with the Leveson and basically with the Daily Mail. The title says Leveson's proposals to penalise the press are against the law and would have chilling effect on free speech. I think it's quite an interesting article, simply because it sort of echoes what we've been saying for a good many months now, that basically, freedom of speech is pretty much at risk here, as is the free press, as is the alternative media community. The people that have pointed this out is a gentleman called Lord Panic. I don't know if we should be drawing any conclusions.
Quite appropriate, yeah.
And Desmond Brown and Anthony White, who both say, all three of them say that Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights will be basically violated.
Well, can I just say I'm slightly uncomfortable with the use of the European, with any European legislation in order to fight this. We should be fighting it on other grounds, I think.
I agree.
Well, 2 points. First of all, we've got Lord Leveson there with his eyes blacked out. I can't stand to look at his eyes anymore. But last night on the BBC, as I was driving home, they were talking about this, and of course, who did they have on as the expert witness? They had somebody from the Media Standards Trust, the Hacked Off campaign, same thing. So that was a balanced discussion that they had.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, but it's not just Leveson, because we've got other legislation, don't we, at the moment?
We do. But before we move on, I just wanted to say, actually, in the article, what I picked out, I thought was interesting, was that Leveson's recommended that there's a threat of exemplary damages if the press don't actually get involved with the new regulator. But of course, this is voluntary, so I thought there's a bit of a conflict there that the papers are supposed to be getting involved voluntary, but of course, if they don't, there's a threat of heavy fines.
Well, we've got to understand what this threat of exemplary damages is actually about. Obviously, the mainstream corporate media is going to join this club, but the exemplary damages are really designed for bloggers, other independent newspapers. UK Column perhaps is target for this, similar organisations.
Sure.
So basically, if you join the club, there's a potential of damages of up to £1 million, I believe, if you don't obey the rules of the club. If you don't join the club, there is basically no limit to the damages that could be awarded against you. So that is a pretty dangerous situation.
I would totally agree. And also, as part and parcel of the article, they talk about the defamation bill, which is basically about newspapers having to basically get approval for publishing contentious stories. So, once again, we're sort of looking at a world where we don't have the freedom to investigate certain people.
Well, indeed, and that is reflected in this little section in the media briefing, where they take some quotes from the week's media. And the one that they particularly wanted to highlight was from Peter Hitchens. I genuinely fear that I will go to prison before I die for writing or saying something that is no longer allowed. I have met quite a lot of people who hate me and my views are so much that they would very much like this to happen. And of course, that we know that just prior to the 2010 election, Cameron was in a meeting with some colleagues where he said, once I get elected, I'm going to legislate against people like this. And he was referring to bloggers, he was referring to alternative media in general. So that's exactly what he has done. Incredible. Okay, we'll move on to government surplus. Because yesterday, after, of course, the news was that Mr. Government Surplus here, George Osborne, managed to record a surplus of £11.4 billion in January. Now, it didn't take long for even the mainstream media to catch on that what was being presented by the BBC is very positive news. Perhaps wasn't quite as positive as might have otherwise appeared, because in fact, when you take public sector net borrowing over from April until January, we find that he has borrowed £93.8 billion additional this year. So that's £1.5 billion more than he had up to this point last year. So it's not really such good news. He's not going to meet his deficit targets. the amount of money, the amount of government debt that we have, it just continues to climb, and that is one of the articles in this month's UK column newspaper. So I ask people to get a copy of that and have a read at it. But as we know, also in the press today, the weak pound has sent petrol prices through the roof. A combination of weak pound and the continuing speculation on the markets on the price of fuel. But why is this happening? Well, the weak pound, the value of the pound has collapsed because Mr. Mervyn King, in the yesterday's, or I think it was the day before, the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee came out, and it turned out that Mervyn King had actually voted for more quantitative easing. He was outvoted on this occasion, so they're not introducing any more quantitative easing at this time. But basically, the markets decided that since he had changed his mind and had decided this time to vote for it, that it's very likely that there will be more quantitative easing in Britain this year. And so that caused the collapse in the pound. But then yesterday we had Michael Heseltine on Question Time. Michael Heseltine is George Osborne's economic advisor. So Osborne doesn't do anything. What that means is he's
surplus.
No, it means that he's his handler, right? So in fact, where Ken Clarke is I believe Ken Clarke is Chairman Cameron's handler, Heseltine is Osborne's handler.
Sorry, I was implying that Osborne was surplus.
Right,
it was actually 11 billion at surplus. It's actually Osborne himself.
Right. So this article in the Telegraph, making a joke of the fact that Heseltine took a phone call from his wife while he was on Question Time. But it was actually a quote from later on in this article that I wanted to highlight, because Heseltine said, after he had finished with speaking to his wife, he said, "The fact of the matter is, the reason why the economy and George Osborne's budget, therefore, is taking longer to sort is because we're in the middle of a world recession that none of us has seen before. It is taking longer to sort out. It is simply dishonest," he said, "for any party to come and pretend there is a serious option. We have to sweat it out. We have to sweat it out."
We have to sweat it out. Yeah.
No serious options to this. Nothing we can do about this economic collapse. Nothing we can do to regenerate jobs in this country. We've just got to sweat it out. And that's the advice Osborne's getting, and that's why this government continues to commit treason, in my opinion.
Well, it is really disconcerting when you would expect that the man advising, the gentleman who's in control of like our money, that or not our money per se, but the way the government spends the money, if that's the best advice he's got, we've just got to sweat it out. That is quite concerning. Well, when there are so many people now who are actually researching things like the greenback and Bradbury that actually can see a much better alternative.
Exactly. I think people should be writing to Heseltine and asking him if he has heard of the Bradbury pound. Yeah. Okay, so what's going on at HMRC then?
HMRC is quite interesting actually, because what they're saying is that there are so many tax cheats out there now that the government's got to clamp down. So what they've done is they've actually published some of the worst offenders, people who have basically been dodging tax for over £25,000. Ironically, people like Google and Starbucks and so forth didn't actually make the list, which I thought was quite strange and interesting. I don't know what you thought or what you felt about that.
Well, two things to notice here. They're becoming very Web 2.0, aren't they, with their Flickr account and putting photographs on Flickr. Very social of them. But who is the bigger criminal here? These guys that are in fact not paying their tax, therefore not contributing to terrorism, not contributing to the big society, not contributing to our continuing corporatization of this country, or the likes of Starbucks, who may not be paying corporation tax. And in fact, one of the things that came out of the figures yesterday with regard to income for January was that corporation tax was well down in January compared to January last year. So we've got these corporations not paying corporation tax, but on the other hand, they are setting up foundations, creating these bogus charities in order to push through the Agenda 21.
Yeah. I thought actually what was really interesting was in the Mail they actually published at the very bottom of the article, they published the people that were the worst offenders at not paying tax, as you quite rightly have pointed out, actually are doing the right thing by not actually aiding and abetting terrorism, but how severely they were penalised, which of course is is a deterrent. But in many cases, some of these people, they had their entire the amount that they defaulted on actually added on to as a penalty. So in one case, a gentleman who is basically a greengrocer avoided £27,889 in tax, and he was fined £27,889. So that would seem really fair in comparison to how much banks, Google, Starbucks, and all these people get fined for their misdemeanors when it's only literally a tiny percentage of the actual money they made. So it would see that there's a real fairness going on in this country.
So this would be a fine imposed without a jury and therefore in breach of the Bill of Rights?
Yeah, absolutely in breach, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Actually, before we just move on, there's really interesting. I've started to look at the comments, just below the article.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and one of the comments was, obviously the large companies need to be chased, but the majority of them have done nothing legally wrong, just morally wrong. And I found that really disturbing. Where actually it's okay as long as you don't break the law to be immoral. That's completely fine. That disturbed me. But
surely law is there to represent morality.
Well,
is it not?
you would kind of hope it was, but then I suppose the legal structure isn't really concerned with morality.
Not anymore.
But of course, there was a bit of sense at the bottom where a gentleman said, frankly, I would rather see the money I pay a tradesman go into his pocket where he or she will spend most of it. Here, take it from them and I will fund who knows what in the land of a friendly dictator. I think what he's getting at is that our tax is going towards
terrorism.
Terrorism.
Yeah. Okay, abroad then, Germany's economy shrunk in the fourth quarter of last year, and you may ask, why is that important? Well, the Eurozone problems continue, nothing's being done to solve them. Now this particular graph was published originally, but I saw it on Zero Hedge a couple of weeks ago, basically showing the disparity between Germany's economic production and France, Spain, and the others, Italy in that case. So we can see that Germany is really the only thing that's keeping Europe going at the moment. So if Germany's economy is starting to shrink again, the potential of going back into recession, then there's no good news. The policies, the austerity policies, the bailout policies just are not working. It's time for these guys to change their approach. Right, complete change of subject now. PC Mike Billen, I suppose you pronounce it, not sure.
Yeah.
He caused a sensation. We showed the video at the time, caused a sensation when he smashed this pensioner's car window. If you remember, this was in South Wales, I believe, and the guy driving the Range Rover claims that he didn't, and we believe him actually, because we have spoken to him, that he didn't realise that the police were chasing him, so he didn't stop.
I think he was committing the heinous crime of not wearing a seatbelt.
That was it.
Yeah.
When he eventually decided to stop, this officer jumped out of his police car and started bashing in the driver's side window with his truncheon. This appeared on YouTube, but this is actually a good news story because this police officer has been forced to resign because of the persistent mickey taking by his colleagues. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we like to see, because as we've been saying for a long, long time, with regard to institutions like the police, if the police are doing a dirty job, who's going to clean that up? Well, the police are going to clean that up, and this is a case of that in action, because this guy has decided that he can't stick around having his ribs tickled by his colleagues. So there you go. The unfortunate side of this, though, is that he's intending to take a constructive dismissal claim against the police, and if he wins that, it's a disgrace. Yeah. Any comments on that?
I mean, it's quite actually extraordinary. I mean, I really encourage people to go and see if they can find the video on YouTube, because it is out there, and the picture really doesn't do justice, because at one point I think the gentleman gets up on the bonnet and starts smashing in the windscreen and so forth, and you just have to wonder actually what's been going on in that gentleman's mind in order for him to do that. And when I suppose you start looking at organisations like Common Purpose and so forth that are sort of operating behind the scenes and training police officers, it may be well worth a dig to anyone who doesn't know or understand about NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, bit of a mouthful, to actually have a good dig at that and to see why that gentleman may well have done that, although that certainly does not excuse his actions.
Well, we've got to also remember that the driver of the Range Rover was 74 years old.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was just completely inappropriate.
Absolutely.
Okay, slave labour then. A4E This picture was this is a screenshot from an interview that Channel 4 News did with Emma Harrison, who was the erstwhile chief executive of A4E, who's the main contractor with regard to the government's welfare to work scheme. And she was being asked some very simple questions by the presenter, and she didn't want to answer the questions, and so he was presenting figures, and she was simply saying, "I don't recognise the figures," and this is clearly a phrase which has come into usage by public figures who don't want to admit to wrongdoing. So they get presented with information and they say, "I don't recognise that information." They don't want to say that's not true because they can't, and they don't seem to be prepared to just outright lie, so they pretend that they don't recognise the figures. But anyway, the main story here is that the government's welfare to work programme has only managed to get 3.6% of people on the scheme off benefits and into secure employment in the first 14 months, and it's cost multiple billions of pounds. So this is really just taxpayers' money being funneled into the private sector. But you know, at the same time, there was no possibility of this programme working because there are no jobs for people to go to. So, you know, it's a bit ridiculous to attempt to put people into jobs that don't exist. If you have no job creation programme, this was never going to succeed.
I think what I find really interesting is under the work programme, actually, providers, as in the people that were taking on the people from benefits, were actually earning between 3,500 to 13,700, which probably equates to roughly what the individual would have gotten straight from the benefit system themselves.
That's per client.
Per client, yeah. And so I find that's really interesting because what we're seeing is basically instead of that money, which is basically would have gone to that individual, instead of it going there, it's gone to the private sector. And this is something that again that we've been talking about for so long now, because it's really, really important that people really get to grips of how the power structure is being moved from the public into the private, and essentially into a global dictatorship, because that's what a corporation is. At the very top is the CEO, and the people below the CEO follow the CEO's rules and regulations. There's no quibbling, there's no democracy in a corporation, you know. And it's again, when you start sending people to work for nothing, which is essentially what a lot of people are being made to do now, you know, that this is communism in action. This is really where we're descending to.
Well, the report, the height of irony, really, because a spokesman for the Department of Work and Pensions said that this report paints a skewed picture. Now, for any person from the Department of Work and Pensions who publish the unemployment figures every month to accuse anybody else of producing a skewed picture is really unbelievable. More than 200,000 people have moved off benefits and into a job thanks to the work programme, according to that spokesman. How long did they stay in the job? Was it for a few weeks over Christmas, or what was, you know? So yes, better move on, hadn't we? Because really, okay.
Well, I think that this next article actually fits in really nicely with what we're talking about, because really what we're talking about with this article, could artificial intelligence offer better customer service than humans? What we're talking about is planned obsolescence now, which is basically the removal of jobs for mankind into the application of jobs for machines. The article itself, and if anyone doesn't know about planned obsolescence, again, I would encourage them to go and research it. But the article itself really piqued my interest because of the language that it uses. It starts off opening with, if Britain abandons manufacturing and becomes a service economy, well, that is already happening. That's going on in action, and again, that's something that you've commented on quite a lot. It also described human beings as being wildebeests. When they were describing a situation, quote, in a packed station ticket office, 50 commuting wildebeest shuffle towards a single ticket office window that will give a safe passage to London. And what the writer was doing, he's describing an example of where machines are much better at doing the job than people, such as the ticket barriers. And it was interesting what Davin Yap, who's the gentleman who's designed this technology, which is looking to replace ticket outlets and so forth. He basically is saying that his technology will put power in the hands of consumers, because he's creating machines that try to anticipate what people want. It uses historical information about shoppers to try to create anticipatory interactions. and they try to figure out the things that you need to know. Basically, what he's talking about is information gathering. He's talking about creating machines and technology which is going to gather your data. It's going to gather your kind of behaviors and your patterns of buying. In order to predict your behaviour. Well, I would say is actually we, the human being, is becoming the article in question. We're becoming the thing that's going to be consumed, because it's our data they're trying to gather.
Yeah.
And they're doing it under the guise of, it's going to be great for you.
I mean, my observation on this would be that people actually don't like dealing with machines. They want to deal with a human being. And aside from cash machines, if you look at queues in supermarkets, for example, it seems to me if you look at in a supermarket, people would prefer to queue up and deal with somebody at a cash till than to use the self-service.
Yeah.
And as a general rule, I think that's so.
The same with automated phones as well. It drives me absolutely crazy when you have to phone an organisation that you've got some sort of agreement with, and you get hit with a machine, because they're presuming that every single one of us, our problems fit nice and neatly into a box, whereas actually every single one of us is individual, and we've all got individual needs and problems.
Yeah. Okay. Renters forced to downsize.
Sorry, yes, that's mine as well.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay, so basically what they're saying is following the bedroom tax, that some people, because obviously that's going to come out of their benefits, they're not going to have enough money to live, so they're going to be forced out of the home that they used to live in into where nobody knows. What the article is suggesting is what might happen is developers are scrambling to build these sort of compacted blocks of one-bedroom flats for people to move into, and of course, as we pointed out about 3-4 months ago, that the government is basically offered to buy houses that don't, or housing flats that don't get sold on the market for government social housing. And what we're concerned about definitely is that when people then get pushed into those social housings, they then become subject to government rule, and that they can't actually oppose it, because if they do, they're out on the streets. So really, what the article is highlighting is that there's about 660,000 people who are basically now at risk of losing their home because they're not going to be able to afford to pay their bills because of this crazy bedroom tax.
Well, I know of one case in particular where the person concerned split up with their partner, had no need for the extra bedroom, has been asking for 2 years for a property that's smaller, and the council has been unable to put them in a suitable property because they don't have a suitable property. But as soon as the bedroom tax came along, of course they sent the bill for the bedroom tax. Okay, so she's refusing to pay that, and we'll see what happens. But I guarantee that she's going to get herself into a bit of trouble in the very near future, because of course they'll send the bailiffs round, won't they? But the point is the councils do not have the housing stock to move these people around.
Well, indeed, and we can't have 660,000 families out on the street. Another
Fantastic initiative from the government. Right. Well, today the BBC has published the Savile papers, 3,000 pages of transcripts of evidence given by 19 individuals to the Pollard inquiry, inquiry, and of course they have decided to censor, must be the word, it's certainly the word that the Guardian's using. They've decided to censor Jeremy Paxman's criticisms of the BBC management, and that does seem to be a bit ironic, doesn't it? But anyway, it's understood that the Guardian's saying that less than 10% of the Pollard Review transcripts will be redacted. Less than 10%. It's only the most important 10% probably, but anyway. But in the meantime, then the BBC acting like a secret service, according to Lord McAlpine. Wow. So he's saying that, of course, they should publish them in full, referring to the Savile documents. The BBC is not the Secret Service, for goodness sake. I'm just paraphrasing that slightly. There's no reason for holding it back. What Jeremy Paxman said should be printed. It should be explained to people. Well, okay. The other news about Lord McAlpine, of course, is he seems to have dropped his claims against Twitter that made any kind of comments about any kind of allegations that may have been made against him, with the exception of Sally Bercow. He's basically saying, isn't it correct? He's saying £25 is what he's asking Twitter users to donate to children in need.
Which I think is absolutely ironic. I don't know, obviously certain viewers will understand what we're saying, but I think that suggested donation is very ironic.
Well, speaking of irony, Chairman Cameron is blasting the BBC for behaving stupidly. Okay, so he's blasting the BBC for behaving stupidly over his election candidate. He, as I said yesterday, he's visiting, is it Eastleigh again? Second time he's visited in the last couple of weeks. He launched a tirade against the BBC after a reporter suggested that his Tory candidate was really no good, I suppose. She was booed after being pulled out of a Radio 5 live hustings session. Cameron didn't like what was going on, so he criticised them. But he was asked similar questions that the BBC asked by other stations, including ITV, and he didn't give them a hard time. So it's clearly he's a bit upset with the BBC, and I do wonder whether it's because the BBC isn't doing a great, or at least people aren't falling for the BBC's propaganda at the moment. Maybe he's a bit unhappy about that. But sticking with Chairman Cameron, he's also he's getting a bit of a backlash from charities over this business of aid money going to defence, as you would expect, charities don't like their government funding being cut. They're supposed to raise the majority of their money from the public, I suppose. I mean, that's what charities are about. But in general, charities are getting funded from government these days. So when government decides to divert funds, they don't like it much. In this case, it's Oxfam doesn't like it much. And, Oxfam saying that really the money should be going on schools rather than soldiers, and we would agree with that. But of course, Cameron's got a problem because he's got two different agendas that he's got to follow here. Somehow he's got to balance the funding of both. He needs to keep money flowing into the charity sector, but he also needs money flowing into the Ministry of Defence. The austerity programme doesn't allow him to do that directly. So
another trip to Mervyn King, maybe. And the magic QE machine.
Yes. Okay. The health service, £15 million, according to the Telegraph, is what was paid spent to gag whistleblowers, and yet this gentleman is still the head of the NHS, Sir David Nicholson, is still in a job. Really, you've got to ask why he's still in a job and why Chairman Cameron continues to support him. Because obviously this money was being spent to gag malpractice within the National Health Service, malpractice such as people dying in their own vomit and faeces in a toilet. What kind of care? Well, we've said it before, there's no need to really go into it in depth again, but the NHS needs to be dealt with.
Just a note, actually, it's interesting that Sir David Nicholson used to be is a former card-carrying communist, which is very interesting when you consider, when you start looking at the Cabinet Office and start looking at what, the way the NHS is being reformed and so forth. I think there's no wonder that David Cameron's quite keen to keep him in post.
Indeed, we've argued that there's no such thing as a former communist.
Well, indeed,
anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay. Lastly then, just an interesting little snapshot. I've not quite got to grips with what exactly is going on with this Scottish independence vote, because obviously Cameron says he's against it, but I don't really think he is. The people of Scotland are clearly against it, so I'm not quite clear why they're running this referendum just now. The support for it just doesn't seem to be there, and in this case 63%. They ran a mock vote to see what they're basically saying what the situation is at the moment, and 63% said no for Scottish independence. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on there, but I'm just not quite clear on where they hope to go with that in the next couple of years. Yeah. Okay. So that we'll end on that point. Just to finish off, if people are watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. But even better, if you want to join us live, as some people know, we're on at 1 o'clock every day. Please subscribe to the UK column and take part in the chat box if you can. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of messages. I discovered today I'm getting a lot of messages in the YouTube inbox. Anybody wanting to contact the UK column, please use the contact form on the website rather than YouTube, because we don't get a chance. We just don't have the time. We don't get the chance to look at that very often. Okay.
I'd also say that tonight on Liberty Tactics we're going to be talking about things that we can do and measures we can take as a positive note of how we can tackle some of the austerity and the sort of subversion that's coming into the country. And in particular, we'll be talking about the groups that we're trying to get going around the country in order to actually take some pro-action.
So you're on Liberty Tactics tonight?
Liberty Tactics tonight.
And how do you listen to that?
You listen to that by, I think it's across the web. And actually, I don't know.
It's TNS, isn't it?
TNS, yeah. You caught me
Brilliant,
out.
Malcolm. Okay, on that note, have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
See you Monday.